Welcome back again to the Unlearning podcast. I'm Stuart Delony. We're here with Karl Forehand and JD Forehand. We got JD actually in the States this time, so it's a continued treat that we have better internet connection for JD as well.
Winston the dog.
Winston the Wonder Dog, we got in that mention too. Thank you, Karl. Today we're going to be talking about advocating for women in marginalized groups. But before we do that, just a reminder that the Unlearning podcast, you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, and if you want to reach out to us, the Unlearning podcast at gmail.com as a way to get a hold of us. And yeah, like, subscribe, all that other jazz that people always tell you to do before they start their stuff. And now we start our stuff. So, Karl, you brought up the topic of advocating for women in marginalized groups. How do we want to dive in on this one?
So it's something I never thought about while I was a pastor too much, because I figured I was engaged with people and helping people and so on. We never thought about being an ally and advocate, especially to queer people and things like that. In our Leaning Forward conference, a lady named Janine McConaughey explained the difference. And if you want to go look for that on YouTube or something, JD was talking about pastors promoting things, not really promoting something. I just know there's a great speech about this on the Leaning Forward conference of 2023 with Janine McConaughey. Just explains thoroughly what's the difference between an ally and an advocate. And I think it's important for us to advocate and be an ally for marginalized people, including women, minorities. So I just want to throw it out there at first, though. What are you guys' ideas of what an ally and or an advocate is, and what's the difference? How do you see it?
JD?
I'm
throwing you in first.
I was to say, like last time, I don't know. And that'd be good.
Yeah,
that's right.
I would say an ally is someone kind of who's there for you, kind of at least tries to understand where you're at, and is there to support you kind of in your personal or like small group struggles. Whereas an advocate would be someone who goes out and, speaks truth to power, for lack of a better phrase. But yeah, someone who advocates, to use a tautology for you. That's, I guess, how I would define them simply.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm not sure if I completely know the distinction between the two, but I guess the ally is just it's more of one that's just supporting a group, where I feel like advocate is being louder about it, either like speaking truth to power or in different forums or things like that. I don't know, Karl. How are you doing? How are you defining those?
I think maybe I have a couple of examples of both. So an ally to gay people, to queer people, is my wife, Laura, who, when several people came out while they were in high school, and Laura was a debate helper, led the debate team, the quiz bowl, whatever it's called, people would come out to her and she was safe. So it wasn't necessarily what she was doing, but she was safe. She was loving, inclusive, and listened to them. So that's being an ally, right? You may put the rainbow on stuff, and make that visible. That way you're hopefully a safe person, a person people can talk to, and you're accepting and loving of all people, no matter who they love, things like that, right? So, but you've also, like the women pointed out in that conference, you have to listen, something I'm still working on, being a good listener and just listening to people and hearing them without judgment, things like that, when they express their opinions about being gay or what it's like to be a woman or what it's like to be a minority, and so on. But the example I would have for an advocate was when there's a certain group, and I won't say the name of the group, but it was a title on the basis of what it formerly was, and now it's new. So I'll just leave it at that. But it was a group that used to be evangelicals, and now they're something else. But when given the challenge in that group to speak up about an abusive speaker that was historically accused of being abusive to his family and other people, the leaders in that group that were just promoting their own stuff and their own conferences and things like that in the group were asked, what do you think about that? what do you have to say about that issue of them platforming someone that's going to traumatize women? And women in the group are going, yes, what are you going to say? Help, and they're like going through this really intense struggle. But that is advocacy is challenging those people that have the power differential that aren't being responsible with it. And I want to tell you that just costs you greatly when you do that. Some of the advocates I know, women and men, they have to take breaks every once in a while, because you go through one event like that where you speak truth to power, like you guys said, then what you get is a response. Usually the leader kind of hides and goes, well, I'll talk to you in a private conversation. But it's all the people around him, usually a him. It's all those people around him that come to his defense. And years ago, when this issue, reared its ugly head, there were people that were just wiped out from standing up to that power structure in that, informal way of doing things that was real abusive when you dared to say anything against that leader. But I think we can be both.
I was going to ask that because I was going to ask that question. Thank you for hopping into that too. Yeah, about being both an ally and an advocate.
I think I would even go so far as to measure the amount of advocacy that you do, because like I said, it costs you something to advocate to the power structures. They don't like being challenged. They don't like being questioned. They don't like, it's a lot of gaslighting. It's a lot of lighting the fuse under their base. We see that in politics, right? And so on. So,
I'd say I don't know if you can be an advocate without being at least in some ways an ally as well, because you won't really have that understanding. But I think to your point about taking breaks from being an advocate, I wouldn't say you take a break from being an ally, but I think it's important to also make sure that you do take care of your own mental health and time well-being, because creating that space for other people and having them, deal with their trauma with you, or being that ear that they need is also taxing. We were talking, this is a minor example of this. We were talking about the other day. I went to my mom's school and did like a little presentation about Lunar New Year. But when we left, Dad was kind of mentioning about how Mom sometimes comes home and it's just like still in teacher mode. But I've had to talk to friends or partners about that before, when you come out, because at school I kind of am that for a lot of the students, whether they deal with mental health issues or they're LGBTQ or whatever. If they have issues, they'll oftentimes come to me because they know I won't send it up the hierarchy or something. I'll just help them deal with it. I'm not perfect at that or whatever, but when I get out of work, people will start asking me questions. What do you want to do? You want to do? And I'll just be like, stop, just leave me alone for a little bit, because I need time to kind of deal with my own stuff, because it's overwhelming. It can be overwhelming. So in order to be that good ally, sometimes we do have to like take time for ourselves or deal with whatever trauma or issues or whatever that we're dealing with. So I think at base level, if we don't take care of ourselves, I don't really like this phrase, but you do have to take care of yourself to some degree to be able to take care of others.
Yeah.
And it also involves, sorry to cut you off, but it also involves like constantly talking to a bunch of different people, but also staying up on your like knowledge of whatever group that you're being an ally for.
That's exactly what I was going to say, is that all the burden of proof is on you, because you're challenging the hierarchy. All they have to do is say, you're just fucking being ridiculous. Yeah. And they'll just gaslight you and just try to discredit you, and their followers will join in and go, you're so stupid, but they're not taking the burden of proof or logic or anything. They're just trying to discredit you.
Reaction, yeah.
And you spend hours and hours and hours digging through facts and screen prints of what they said in the past and those kind of things, and you point that out, and they just dismiss you as being really stupid and not someone to be listened to, and you're just a troublemaker, and all of that's it's a burden. I think it's worth it. I think it's good. I think it's something we need to do. We need to speak up for those that can't speak up for themselves or having a tough time, but it's definitely something to it.
I think there's also with advocacy, another thing is sometimes it's I don't know, it's like a very tough needle to thread, but I think sometimes people get over for different reasons. Sometimes because they really want to help these groups, and sometimes maybe out of a little bit of like, they kind of want to be a part of the solution, or it's kind of like an ego thing. But people get over amped about, I've got to be the one that's the advocate for this. And I think in a lot of cases, it's about being an ally first and creating a space where people who are in those groups can stand out and say it. I think there are certain times maybe where it is more beneficial, say if it's a racial thing, that a white person steps out and says something about it. But I think in general, it's probably better for those groups to either do it themselves or to wait until they ask you to do that for them. Because there's a lot of, in that realm, like white saviorism, or you can get to like men's thing. It's like, well, the whole issue is the patriarchy and men speaking over women. So why am I going to step out and speak for you unless you ask me to, kind of thing. And all that's obviously fraught with a bunch of different, everyone's going to have their different opinion about what's the best way to do it and everything. But that's why I think allyship and creating those like community spaces where we can have these discussions and then kind of come to these decisions and to do it as a group is better. So I think kind of creating a community and this sense of allyship is in some ways like a precursor to getting to that advocacy. And also to some of those groups where they're just dismissive and they just talk down to you. I think in some cases, it's not worth advocating to those groups. You kind of just cut them off and go, okay, you're anathema. You guys aren't open to this, so fuck you. We're not even going to like look at you, talk to you, interact with you until you're ready to sit down and have a conversation.
Narcissist is the biggest penalty. Right?
Exactly. Because that in a lot of cases, that's what they want, is they want that, to use social media terms, that engagement, because whether it's positive or negative, it fuels eyeballs. And so in a lot of cases, that's what I've found is with people who I have that are like tangentially, acquaintances and stuff, when they're being fiery and vitriolic and stuff, a lot of times I'll just go, okay, I'm just going to go form another, friend group over here. And then eventually they come knocking on the door. Maybe I was a little, yeah, you were an asshole. So like, if you want to come in, then you got to sit down and like listen a little bit and certainly be part of the conversation, but don't get to talk over people, kind of thing. And I think that can have a response, but trying to engage with them on their level is kind of like trying to get in a screaming match with a toddler. You're going to lose.
Yeah, and I think it's also like, kind of hopping on what you're saying too, JD. I think being an ally and learning to listen, I think also helps us to understand even better. It's not simply just us being there for another person, which is important in the allyship, but I think it also, giving that shared space, we're able to hear the stories, we're able to understand it more, because a lot of times it's human nature to, there's a problem that I just learned about existing in the world. I'm going to read a little bit about it, and I need to lead a new ministry or need a new charge and all this other kind of stuff. And you're like, stop. I appreciate the enthusiasm. That's great. The enthusiasm is great.
Preaching to me now.
Yeah, but then you need to, pull back and be comfortable being an ally. Listen, people will ask you to advocate in situations too. You don't have to be I think JJ, you just said white savior mentality. And I think some of it it's that idea of going in and being less, like going in to listen. I don't need to go in and be an expert. I just want to listen to your stories. I want to hear, what do you need? Not what I think you need, not what I think is the right in the situation. I think it's just being able to be present and be able to then, hold people's stories and let them get into you, and having appropriate space. Because yes, being an ally can be exhausting at times. But I think some of it is we just want to fix everything immediately. And we're like, oh no, okay, let's fix racism. Just kind of like, I mean, the NFL did it. The NFL fixed it, having, end racism in the end zones. That did it. Yeah. No, but I think that the role of, for me being like a white guy going like, yes, let me figure out how to end racism. Let me tell you all I know and everything I've learned. No, I mean, but if I cared about racism, I need to be an ally. I can get involved, but I can just be a person that helps the advocates too. Yeah. And that's an okay posture.
What they tell me, what women tell us they need the most is what Stuart said: listen to our stories. Over and over and over again, they said that. listen to our survivor stories, then you'll understand and you'll empathize with us, and you know when to speak up. And it's, not so that we can take action, but so that we can understand and empathize with where they are. What minorities have told me the most, just my experience, but they've said, don't make me keep explaining this to you. Mm-hmm. You really just need to, not just on a podcast, spend some time with people that are disenfranchised, and understand what they've gone through. You might have to read, you might have to just actually spend some time with people. But I think it's all back to listening. Yeah, it's back to listening.
Yeah, I think that's where that allyship and community starts. But it's also understanding that, and I think this is when we get to like the higher levels of like researching and things like that, a lot of, or some of this at least is lost, is that these communities aren't monoliths. And you also have to remember there's things like intersectionality, where it's like someone might be part of some whatever minority group or the LGBTQ community, but that means a million different things to a million different people. True. And so the only way that you're going to get that detailed level of understanding is what Stuart said, is you have to sit down with those people and listen to what they have to say. And it's probably, in a lot of cases, at least from my experience, a lot of times that's disparate, because people come, I have different friends from different backgrounds, and they may have one shared characteristic, but they may have totally different experiences and totally different needs for what they want and what they desire in terms of advocacy. And so that gets into kind of, you have to have that community, and then it's going to be messy is another thing. And you kind of have to navigate those waters as best you can. But primarily, I think it's to create something where everyone feels safe and heard and understood, probably most important.
Can I ask a weird question?
No.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I defer to Winston.
He left. He walked out.
Yeah, he's already walked out on us. He's had it.
Yeah. What's your question?
He just hates cats. That's his core theology. So
he's not an ally.
So, real honestly, sometimes, and this may trigger something, but with some people, but I just look at pastors and I say inside, in many ways, pastors seem like the saddest people in the world. And I know that goes against our grain because we're making fun of them sometimes, right? But I look at them and say, they have trauma. They have traumatic theologies. They don't know what to do with it. They're expected to be so my question is kind of, how would you be an ally and an advocate to a pastor who's creating part of the problem, and what would you do for that person that would help the overall situation? And I don't know, because I find myself like when a team's losing in football, even if that was the team she was cheering against, she starts to feel sorry for them, right? And I find myself kind of in that sometimes, where I want to talk to pastors real directly and tell them, what I'm upset about of what happened in the past and what's still continuing to happen. But at the same time, I feel that like empathy for them to some degree. So what's our part for them, to them?
An act of wisdom would be understanding if they're even receptive, because I feel like allyship is about relationship. And I feel like, for us to be able to sit and be quiet and listen and hear, it takes time, and it takes a relationship. And for most pastors that we're like, you suck, Robert Jeffress, or whatever, we can go give them our truth, but they're not going to hear us because they don't want to hear it. And so there's the idea of receptivity, but it's also then it's about proximity. But do we have that proximity to where we can have space and relationship for them to hear hard things? My guess is the answer is going to be no to both of them. A, they're not going to want it. And B, we don't have proximity to it. But in an ideal world where we are trying to be empathetic, even for the losing teams, I think in some sort of a way, yes, it's possible. Is it probable that we will ever be in a scenario like that? Not a ton, unless,
So even though they speak for 45 minutes on Sunday, their answer to you in an email may be very, very short. It's a pat answer to get out of it. Because they have so many people to talk to. I don't know.
They don't want the conversation.
I'm good with people we've talked about before.
I was gonna say, I think if for mega pastors and stuff, I think that ship has sailed unless you're also kind of among their echelon. I don't know that you'll ever get that, but for people that you actually know in person, I think it's the same thing, I guess, as allyship is you have to form some sort of community or at least be able to sit down with them face to face, because social media, they're going to posture, email, they might deflect, or even, anywhere they can get out of it. But if you can, I have noticed this with a lot of people that will kind of have like an argument, and I'll just ask them, okay, let's go grab coffee, or like, let's go have a meal or something. And they tend to be much more reasonable. That doesn't mean that they're going to flip overnight, but you might plant seeds to some degree, or at least have a discussion. And a lot of people, like, again, you're never going to reach them. But I think that the only way to actually get that is to sit down face to face, either one-on-one or in a very small group of people that they trust, and then have those tough conversations. But I think aside from that, I don't think there's any like realistic likelihood that they're gonna make any sort of change. Because what are you gonna do? Yell at them on Facebook? I mean, again,
Right.
If they even respond, first, it's probably gonna be all their followers that come after you. Second of all, they're just gonna either ignore it or make some snide comment, and maybe that even makes the situation worse, because they can do the whole, I must be right because people disagree with me or people hate me. Persecuted.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a victim.
What about listening? So we've all mentioned listening. What are components of good listening? Because I'm obviously the worst in this group.
Wait, what did you say, Karl? Can you repeat what you just said? No. What are components of listening? I think it's also asking good questions sometimes, because if we're talking about people that are in situations, well, anytime you talk about folks that are marginalized, there's trauma there, there's pain there. And what we do with trauma and pain a lot of times is we learn how to deflect with it. And so I think some of it's learning to ask the right questions, but also shut up and realize, yeah, this isn't about you, and that we don't know what the outcome of this conversation is going to be. It could go here, here, here. And I think it's being okay with whatever and not having an agenda with it other than, I want to just be here and I want you to feel heard.
My therapist just repeats what I say sometimes. I'm upset about this, and that. So you're upset about this, and that. They just repeat it back to me.
I think as long as that doesn't become a way to bypass it in and of itself, because you can just repeat what someone says and not really listen to them. But yeah, I think a combination of both those things. I think also additionally to both of those, though, is knowing what that person needs, and that you won't know that right away. And again, to Stuart's point, you're not going to fix it in a week or a couple of meetings or one meeting or whatever. It's going to be likely years to deal with. Look how long you silly gooses have been deconstructing. Decades now. Still seeing therapists and stuff, unlike me, who's perfect, and I've dealt with all my stuff. I'm fine.
That's why we have you here.
I'm the guru to tell you all the answers.
Yeah, you are the one.
That's definitely very clear in this. No, but I think, and sometimes this involves kind of experience, but also I think in a lot of cases it just involves asking people what they want. Do you just need someone to talk to right now?
Yeah.
Are you looking for solutions? What do you want right now? And I think, especially at the beginning, probably a lot of people just wanted you to listen to them. And once you listen to them, then they'll trust you. And then you can work on solutions. But I think, and I'm guilty of this too, and my students will tell me this. They're like, cut me some slack. I'm still working. I'm processing through this right now. And so if they're still processing through it, they don't fully understand it. You're not going to be able to give them solutions, because even if you may know magically, the answer somehow, they're not going to be able to accept that until they feel like they fully can come to grips with the situations. I think that all comes down to building a relationship, building some sort of community where they feel safe enough to divulge that thing and tell you what they're really trying to work through, what they really want to get out of it.
No, that's good. Because I think being able to ask the difference. I'd have to learn this with my wife. But when I do it, like, do you want me just to listen? Do you want to be heard? And we're listening here, or are you looking for me to get solutions and how to fix things? Because my brain will do that. And I think especially with allyship, some of it is just realizing that there's a problem and this problem may not be solved. And sometimes the most important thing is the fact that this whatever is happening sucks, but I'm here with you. We will just continue to walk together through this, even if it doesn't get fixed. Because I think sometimes when we go into advocacy, we want, like, our whole goal is ending this and fixing all of this. And like you said, JD, these are big things depending upon what issue we're talking about. And I think it's just realizing it's a long haul. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we're here for people.
Yeah.
And it's those people that we're allies with that we want to continue to just walk through.
And you or I may not have the solution. We may not be the person that can fix it.
That's
but
true.
We can certainly be the person that will sit there and listen and maybe help them get to the person or group that will help them actually solve that problem. If it's solvable, like you said, there are some things that you're going to deal with your whole life, and we can make it better, but we may not be able to solve it. And that's tough because our brains don't work like that. We see problem, solution. It's not always the best way to deal with these things.
When Laura and I look back on ministry, we think the biggest mistakes we made were when someone's dysfunction made us uncomfortable, or someone's problem made us uncomfortable, or someone's ideas made us uncomfortable, or their trauma. And in that uncomfortableness is an unregulated state. And one of the best things we can do maybe is regulate first, and then continue, let's breathe together. And I think that's even kind of why we pray together, is to try to regulate. It's kind of an inborn thing, but if someone tells us something and then we're just uncomfortable, we're in an unregulated state. We're working not from our reasoning, but from our lower brain. We're just reacting. We're just trying to get rid of it as quick as we can so we can get on to something else. Anyway. I don't know if that made any sense.
No, I think it does. I mean, I think that it fits back to maybe in another session we were talking. JD, you were talking about how we get so caught up in the journey, like the destination part of the journey, as opposed to just I'm walking with this part of the journey, day to day part of this journey. Because you're right, Karl. Like, sometimes being an ally it's going to confront things in you that you're uncomfortable with, and we need time and space for us to process it. And for us, and I go, oh, you're bad, Karl, because you felt that. No, you're like, no, I need time to regulate. I need time to think this out and process this. And that's okay. And I think, as much as being a good ally is being patient and giving others time, I think it's also, we have to afford ourselves the same thing.
Yeah, I don't feel guilty because I feel like there's a couple of times when I talked, especially to men, maybe going through something tough, and I feel like I just triggered them again. I just, gave them something that made them feel ashamed, and then they kind of melted, and then we could kind of regulate together, and then they leave, and they felt like I felt like I had done something. I regret stuff like that.
But if you have that relationship, then they should feel, you should have made it clear, hopefully they understand this, is that we're all gonna fuck up, and if you do that, then they can come to you with that. Because I know some of the people that I can best work through stuff like that with are people who sometimes say shit that pisses me off, or say the wrong thing and it makes me frustrated or brings up past trauma. But I can, maybe not in the moment, but I can call them later and say, you said this and it kind of fucked me up, so let's talk about that more. But that's the process. No one's going to have all the right answers, right? Maybe not even any of them. But it is important that we, again, build that community so we're able to go, yeah, I'm fallible. I'm going to make mistakes. Call me out on them, obviously, hopefully in a constructive way. But we have to be able to have that dialogue, because otherwise it's just going to be, well, we just do our best and then maybe we piss each other off and then we don't talk about it. Well, then that's just creating more issues that are going unsolved, right? So.
And Karl, and I know you have those regrets, but I think those regrets have also helped fuel you to be different into where you are today as well.
Yeah.
And I think we can look back on those things where we are like, dang, and be super frustrated with it. But you were operating under a worldview that made sense to you, and that's all you knew at the time when you were doing that. Maybe it was survival, maybe it was out of trauma, maybe it was a lot of other things. And I know I do the same to myself. I look back and I'm like, dang it. But I also have to realize I have to just be kinder. You know, it doesn't sound like you were trying to be bad. You were trying to like be malicious with it. It's just that you hadn't dealt with all of your own shit yet either. And you're learning from it. And I think you being authentic and open about it, it's part of a healing for you, but it's healing for other people to hear this too.
Yeah.
As we walk through it.
I feel like the best thing about trauma work, we're kind of getting off topic here, but best thing about trauma work is that it helps you respond instead of react.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so everything is, there's time for regulating and breathing, pausing, so that you can give a better response instead of just reacting from, again, like you said, from your own trauma. It's good.